my channel. Today I am giving you guys my full review of the new Instant Look in a palette from Charlotte Tilbury. This is new to her holiday launch for 2019, and this is actually my first Instant Look palette. I've never bought one before. Now this palette retails for $75. You can get it on the Charlotte Tilbury website. You can also pick it up at Sephora. This palette basically has everything you need. You have the bronzer, and then these two are for the cheek, and then this is the highlighter, and then these up here are for the eyes. Now obviously you can use it any way you want, but as you know, typical Charlotte Tilbury, she kind of gives you a guide here on the back of the palette, letting you guys know where to place what shade and how to use each shade. So this is a limited edition palette. She always releases limited edition stuff during the holidays. Now, as you guys know, I have been working really hard on this video. I've had this palette for a month. This is the Starry Eyes to Hypnotize, and I reviewed this, and the file is wonky, and I'm having a hard time getting it to upload to YouTube. And it was a very long video to film because there was 4 different looks that I did with the palette. And it was just a long day. It was probably a 12-hour filming day. And then I've had to edit the video twice, which each time it took about 6 hours. So I'm on my 3rd time, but I think I figured out which file was corrupted. And anyway, so this review is coming up very soon. I'm just still working on it. It's been kind of a pain, to be honest with you. So I will be having this up next week, but this one, many of you guys had requested for me to, go ahead and review this palette because recently I had reviewed this new limited edition highlighter. This is the Magic Star highlighter, and if you guys did not see that review, I will leave it up here in the iCards and also in the description box down below. But many of you guys requested for me to go ahead and review this palette. Now in this review, I try on all the shades. I use everything in here. I also compare these shades to some of the other palettes that I have in my collection from Charlotte Tilbury. I don't have a lot, but I have several. I have several of the little quads. I also compare it to the Film Star Bronze and Glow, just so you guys can see the variation. I know that if you're like me and you are gradually building up your Charlotte Tilbury collection, there might be some repeats in there. So later on, after the application and all that, I will get into the swatches, and then I will get into all of my final thoughts on it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into the application, and I will see you guys in my final thoughts. Okay, so let's get playing with this palette from Charlotte Tilbury. I do love the packaging on these, like I really do. I think the packaging is really, really pretty. So you use this one first to brighten, this one to enhance, this one to smoke, and then you have the cheek and the cheek. This is the swish part and this is the pop part. And then you have the highlighter and the bronzer. So we're gonna go ahead and bronze. I've only put on a tiny bit of contour just to kind of give the face a little bit of dimension. So I'm gonna grab this brush. The only thing I will say about this little cheek is I'm like hoping that my brush will fit in it because this is my favorite blush brush. Oh shit, you guys. That has much more pigment than I was expecting. Okay, so I gotta wipe the brush off. Yeah, that has a lot of pigment. Holy shit, you guys. I was not expecting that much pigment. So I'm just taking my powder brush to kind of like try to blend that in. A lot more than I thought it was going to. It looks kind of dull in the pan, but holy smokes. Now it does kind of have like an orange undertone. For those of you that don't like that warm, like orange undertone bronzer, then this might not be the one for you. I actually really like the color of this bronzer. It's way more pigmented than her Film Star Bronze and Glow. Like her Film Star Bronze and Glow to me is not that pigmented. This one, super pigmented. I always hate putting bronzer on my forehead. I know that I need to shrink my forehead, but I have these ridges in my forehead. You can see those little dips. And it's really hard to blend. Like, I don't know. It's just kind of a pain, to be honest. Now let's move on to the blush. So I think I'm just gonna like do this And those are very pigmented too. So far, the bronzer and the blush, very pigmented. So I'm gonna grab her powder, the Charlotte Tilbury Flawless powder, and kind of go over top of it just to kind of tone it down. It's really pretty though. So I'm gonna go into this shade right here. Oh, that's pretty. Reminds me of the highlighter in the Film Star Bronze and Glow palette. That is so pretty. It's kind of got like a light champagne kind of tint to it. It's really pretty. Very soft on the face too. Okay, so let's get started with the eyes. Now, you could follow the steps that she has provided in the palette. You start here and then move over, but I kind of want to play around with it. I feel like if you're going to buy this palette, or maybe you've bought the palette, you kind of want to play around with it instead of just following the rules, you know? I'm actually going to go into that bronzer because I kind of feel like it's going to be pigmented enough to use in the crease. So let's try it. Now I'm going to move into the shade Smoke. I'm going to switch to my Builder Pro, and I'm going to go into that shade Smoke, and I'm going to put it here on the outer corner. So I'm going to go into that shade and bring it on the lower lash line. I'm going to go into the number 2 right here. Now I'm going to go into the Brighten shade. Place that here on the inner corner. Oh, that shade's pretty, you guys. It's really pretty. Kind of using that right there in the inner corner. And then I'm going to grab this shade right here. I'm going to go back to the Brighten shade and then just kind of blend that into the Enhance shade. I'm going to go into the highlighter and see what the highlighter will look like on the inner corner. I want to use this one. I just think that shade is gorgeous. It's such a pretty, like, champagne shade. Oh, love it. Okay, I do want to kind of smoke out my lower lash line. So I'm going to take a brush like this, and I'm going to go into the Smoke shade, and I am going to tightline and really kind of define my lower lash line with that shade. I'm going to go ahead and put some eyeliner in my waterline and put some mascara on, and I will come right back and we'll get through the swatches and I'll give you guys my final thoughts. So I'll be right back. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the swatches of this palette. So in this image, this is an image of the palette swatched. I do take images with and without a flash just so you guys can see, you know, what it looks like underneath the light and what it looks like just regular. Let's go ahead and move on to the next swatches. So these swatches, I decided to pull some of my, you know, Charlotte Tilbury out and compare these shades to some of the Charlotte Tilbury stuff that I have in my collection. So I have the Charlotte Tilbury Film Star Bronze and Glow. This one is the light medium or fair medium, I think. Yeah, this is the fair medium. The bronzer is not that dark on me. It's normally the bronzer that I reach for more during the winter time. So the highlighter in this Bronze and Glow palette, as you'll notice in this image, it is the exact same shade as the highlighter in the instant look in a palette. So just so that you guys see that, you know, you can tell even under the flash or without the flash, it's pretty much the exact same. The bronzer is definitely deeper in this instant look in a palette. It does have a deeper shade. You can barely see the Film Star Bronze and Glow bronzer just because it's, you know, it blends right into my skin tone. But the Instant Look bronzer is definitely darker than this one. The next images that I have, I compared this shade right up here, this smoke shade, to some of the other palettes that I have that had kind of similar shades. So the ones that I found that were similar are in the Dreamgasm palette and the Dolce Vita palette. The only difference is the Instant Look palette is a matte shade, and the Dolce Vita and the Dreamgasm are not. They have a little bit of a shimmer. So they're kind of the same shade family, but they're definitely not the same just because, you know, one's a shimmer and one's a matte. I wanted you guys to see that shade compared to some of the other shades in the Charlotte Tilbury collection. So then next up, I went ahead and compared this shade right here. This is the Brighten shade, and I compared that shade to some of the other shades that I have in my 4-pan quads. In my opinion, it looked very similar to the Brighten shade in the Exaggerized palette. So, you know, when I looked at them side by side, they pretty much look like the exact same shade. The Brighten shade in the Walk of Shame, the Dolce Vita palette, and the Dreamgasm palette were a little bit lighter than this Brighten shade in this Insta Look and in the Exaggerize. But in my opinion, they were very, very similar. And even the way that they swatched and the way that they applied on the arm was very similar. With all of the swatches out of the way, let me give you guys my final thoughts. I actually really like this palette. There are a lot of similarities to some of the other stuff that I already have in the Charlotte Tilbury collection, which is kind of a bummer. Like, I kind of would have liked to have had a palette like this where I don't have any of these shades already in her collection, but it is nice to have it convenient all just here in this one palette. I will say I am not a super fan of this number 2 shade. This is the Enhanced shade. I kind of struggled. I had to switch brushes. I couldn't get a brush to really apply that shade, so I actually had to switch to like a felt tip applicator in order for me to get it on. I feel like that shade is best applied with a finger, and because I have nails, applying with a finger is always a pain, so that's why I reached for my felt tip. But I took my Builder Pro, which is the brush that I would normally use to grab a shade like that, and I just could not get it to apply. So let me show you. So I'm just going to kind of dig in here and try to get quite a bit on here. And then, like, it does not want to apply with, it's just kind of lacking. That is definitely a shade that you need to apply with your finger or a felt tip applicator. You're not able to apply with a brush. I mean, it would take you forever to sit there and try to build up that shade with a brush. I guess my point is, I just wish that shade was a little bit easier to work with. That, in my opinion, is kind of the dud in the palette. The bronzer, as you saw in the tutorial, was definitely much more vibrant than I thought it was going to be, so that was a nice surprise. But as soon as I applied the highlighter, I automatically knew that it was the Film Star Bronze and Glow highlighter. I think I might have said it. I don't know. I'll have to check in the editing. But I think I even said it when I applied it, that it reminded me of the highlighter in the Film Star Bronze and Glow. Just the way that it applies on the skin, and I do think it's a beautiful highlighter. Now, if you have a darker complexion, Kinky Sweat here on YouTube, I will link her video in the description box down below. She actually reviewed this palette, and it was nice to see these shades actually applied on her skin. And so I do feel like if you are a darker skin tone and you've been kind of wondering if this palette would work for you, definitely watch her video, see how it applies on her complexion, and then make your decision from there. But I actually really like this palette. Even though there's a lot of repetitiveness going on in this palette, I think I will be reaching for it. If you are a Charlotte Tilbury collector, I think you'll really enjoy this palette. I like it. I really do. I love the eyeshadow. I love the depth that I was able to create. I really like the blush and the blush pop that's with it. I think it creates a very beautiful shine to the skin, and I really like the bronzer. Just go in very light-handed. If you have a light complexion, just be careful with that orange undertone. I don't know how that's gonna look on a lighter complexion, so be mindful of that. If it doesn't work for you as a bronzer, I guarantee you it will be really pretty as a transition shade. I think this palette is perfect for that person that maybe doesn't have a lot of makeup. I'm considering buying this for my mom for Christmas. I actually think she'd get a lot of use out of a palette like this. So that's it for the review of this new palette from Charlotte Tilbury. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much for all the love that you show me and my channel. It means so much to me. I love you all so, so much, and I will see you guys in tomorrow's video, and I love you all so much. Bye.